The series begins by showing 3 members of the Night's Watch who are on patrol to protect the wall or the fortress of the Northern Kingdom from rebels, wild animals, and pet thieves. While scouting in the forest, one of them, named Will, discovers the mangled remains of humans, including the intact corpse of a boy. Alarmed, Will immediately reports back to his 2 companions and describes what he has seen. Out of curiosity, they decide to investigate despite Will's warning that it was too dangerous. Strangely, when they reach the location, the bodies have disappeared, leaving only a severed hand buried in a mound of snow. During that moment, a mysterious creature suddenly appears and kills one of them. The creature proves to be faster and kills another member. Out of the 3 Night's Watch members, only Will survives, but he is captured by the soldiers of Winterfell, who consider him a deserter for fleeing his duty at the wall. In Winterfell, a boy named Bran is seen practicing archery under the guidance of his 2 older brothers, Jon Snow and Robb, watched by their father, the Lord of Winterfell, Eddard Stark, often called Ned, along with his beloved wife, Lady Catelyn. Inside, 2 girls, Sansa and Arya, daughters of Ned, are learning to sew, while the youngest child, Rickon, is not seen yet. Back to Bran, who is startled when an arrow whizzes over his head, shot by Arya as a prank. At the same time, a commander named Roderick reports that his men have captured a Night's Watch deserter. Hearing this, Ned must enforce the law and punish the Night's Watch deserter. Therefore, he asks Robb to bring Bran to witness the execution as a lesson for adulthood. Though Catelyn disagrees because Bran is still young. Catelyn also shows her displeasure towards Jon Snow because he is her husband's illegitimate son. Before his execution, Will tries to explain that he fled out of fear of being killed by the White Walkers. Unfortunately, Ned does not believe him and proceeds with the execution. After that, Bran questions his father, who explains that the creatures disappeared thousands of years ago. On their way back, they find a dead stag and, nearby, a dead direwolf with her surviving pups. Seeing this, Lord Ned then instructs Theon to kill the pups, as they would otherwise die in the wild. However, Bran objects, and Jon Snow argues that the direwolf is their house sigil. Consequently, Lord Ned allows his children to raise the 6 pups. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, the capital of the 7 Kingdoms, a funeral is being held for Jon Arryn, the hand of King Robert. At that moment, Cersei Lannister, the wife of King Robert, and her brother Jaime Lannister are pleased with Jon Arryn's death, as he was the only one who knew their dark secret. The next day, Catelyn received a raven carrying a letter and informed her husband that Jon Arryn had died. This shocked Ned because Jon Arryn had been like a father to him. Additionally, Catelyn mentioned that King Robert was on his way to Winterfell with his family. Hearing this, Lord Ned seemed to understand that King Robert's visit was to appoint him as the hand of the king. Not long after, Winterfell was busy preparing for the arrival of King Robert. Even the princes had to shave their hair, mustaches, armpits, and body hair to look neat and handsome. Meanwhile, Bran, who loved climbing cliffs, was very enthusiastic about watching King Robert's procession from afar. However, it was different for Arya, who chose to wear boys' clothes to watch the procession. Upon the king's arrival, Prince Joffrey was seen exchanging glances with Sansa, the daughter of Lord Ned. Meanwhile, the king of all kings in the 7 Kingdoms, King Robert, was seen with Queen Cersei by his side. After meeting Lord Ned, King Robert immediately invited him aside to speak privately. While they were alone, King Robert explained that Jon Arryn's death was very sudden. Therefore, he wanted Ned to replace Jon Arryn as his hand of the king. Apparently, Robert had a strong reason, as Ned was the one who had helped him become king. Additionally, they almost became brothers-in-law because Robert once had a relationship with Ned's sister. Now, King Robert had another plan as he wanted to betroth Joffrey to Sansa. Meanwhile, a dwarf man who was part of the king's entourage was Tyrion Lannister, the brother of Cersei and Jaime. At that time, Jaime generously offered him 3 women as long as Tyrion would accompany him to the king's welcome feast that night. At the same time, King Robert was also seen visiting the tomb of Ned's sister, who was killed by the Targaryen family. Meanwhile in Pentos, a girl from the Targaryen family named Daenerys was seen being bathed after being forced by her brother Viserys because she was soon to meet her prospective husband. It turned out that Viserys was forcing his younger sister to marry because he needed the help of the Dothrakis to reclaim the Targaryen throne from King Robert. Interestingly, when her prospective husband Khal Drogo came to meet Daenerys, He did not say a word and only stared at her before leaving, which frustrated Viserys. It turned out, Daenerys rejected the arrangement because Khal Drogo was too handsome and mesmerizing for her. However, Viserys tried to convince her that it was for the good of the Targaryen family. Back in Winterfell, Sansa looked very happy when her mother told her about the planned engagement to Prince Joffrey. It wasn't just the prince's handsomeness that made her happy, but she also really wanted to become a queen. That night, during the feast, King Robert couldn't resist his flirtatious nature with a castle servant in front of his queen. Meanwhile, Jon Snow chose to practice swordsmanship instead of attending the feast because he feared that his status as an illegitimate child would tarnish the family's reputation. Shortly after, Uncle Benjen, one of the commanders of the Night's Watch who guards the wall, arrived. Jon Snow then asked Benjen to take him as a member of the Night's Watch rather than staying there and being continually scorned by his stepmother. However, Benjen refused because he feared his father's anger. After Benjen left, Tyrion approached Jon Snow, calling him an illegitimate child. It turned out that Tyrion understood Jon Snow's feelings, as he also felt different from his other siblings. Not long after, Benjen went to Ned to congratulate him after hearing rumors that he would soon be appointed as the Hand of the King. However, Ned didn't want to discuss it and admitted he was still troubled by Will's last words before his execution, claiming to have seen White Walkers. Hearing this, Benjen understood, noting that as winter approaching, the kingdom must remain vigilant. After the feast, Catelyn was seen reading a letter from her sister, Lisa, stating that her husband, Jon Arryn, had been murdered by the Lannister family and that King Robert was in great danger. At the same time, Luwin, the Stark family advisor, suggested that Ned accept King Robert's offer to become the Hand of the King, as only Ned could be trusted to handle the Lannisters' betrayal against the kingdom. On the other hand, a wedding took place between Daenerys, the Targaryen princess, and Khal Drogo, the ruler of the Dothraki. Additionally, during the wedding ceremony, 3 lives had to be sacrificed as a sign of their happiness. At the same time, a man named Ser Jorah Mormont gave Daenerys a book about the history of the 7 kingdoms and mentioned that he once served her father when he was king. Moreover, Daenerys received 3 dragon eggs from a magister, as she had become the Khaleesi or princess of the Dothraki. After the ceremony ended, Khal Drogo then took Daenerys away from the feast. The next day in Winterfell, King Robert invited Ned to join him on a hunting trip. At the same time, after learning that his father would be away for a while, Bran decided to pursue his hobby of climbing the tower. As Bran approached the top, he became suspicious after hearing strange noises from the balcony. When he looked through the window, he saw the Lannister siblings engaged in intimate activities. Worried that their secret would be reported to the king, Jaime decided to push Bran from the tower. Shifting to Daenerys, who was being taken home by her husband to Dothraki lands, now bearing the title of Khaleesi, Ser Jorah, aware of Khal Drogo's rough nature in bed, advised Daenerys to be patient, assuring her that she would get used to it. Ser Jorah also promised to protect her as the rightful heir to the throne. However, he couldn't understand why Viserys continued to follow Khal Drogo's procession. Viserys then replied that he wouldn't leave until Khal Drogo provided him with an army to reclaim the throne from King Robert, promising to treat Ser Jorah well once he ascended to the throne. Back in Winterfell, Tyrion was awakened by Joffrey, who informed him they needed to prepare to leave. Because of this, Tyrion suggested that Joffrey bid farewell to Lord Ned and his wife, as Winterfell had treated them kindly. However, the arrogant prince dismissed their significance. Infuriated, Tyrion slapped Joffrey several times, reprimanding him for speaking in such a manner unbefitting of a prince. During breakfast, Tyrion stated that Bran would not die, and he was eagerly anticipating what he would say once he regained consciousness. To dispel any suspicion, Cersei deliberately approached Catelyn, pretending that she would always pray for Bran's recovery. Meanwhile, Jon Snow was approached by Jaime, who congratulated and mocked him as he was about to enlist in the Night's Watch. Jaime taunted him, saying that as a member of the Night's Watch, Jon Snow would not be allowed to have children or marry anyone, as his life would be dedicated to guarding the wall. Afterward, Jon Snow met Arya and gave her a small sword as a farewell gift. Jon Snow also visited Bran, who was still unconscious, and said his goodbyes as a sign of his affection for his siblings, even though he was often considered an illegitimate child at Winterfell. Not only was Jon Snow leaving Winterfell, but Ned was also saying his goodbyes despite Catelyn not permitting her husband to go to the capital. It turned out, Catelyn remembered 17 years ago when her husband left with King Robert for a year, and instead of bringing back souvenirs, he brought back an illegitimate child without anyone knowing who the mother was. Now she was worried that it might happen again. In short, they all left with their respective duties. Before parting, Jon Snow asked Ned about his mother, but he promised to tell him about her if they met again. During their time, Ned and King Robert reminisced about their youth, filled with battles and women. They also received news about the marriage of Khal Drogo, the leader of the Dothraki, to Daenerys from the Targaryen family. At that moment, Ned became angry upon hearing the name Targaryen, recalling what they had done to his family. Ned also admitted that he was not afraid, even though the Targaryens were now allied with the Dothraki, who had more than 100,000 troops. On the other hand, Tyrion joined Jon Snow's group to visit the Wall, where Tyrion admired the Night's Watch, who had guarded the Wall from the threat of mysterious creatures called White Walkers for thousands of years. Back in Winterfell, Catelyn tirelessly cared for Bran, causing Robb to worry. Catelyn was so engrossed that she forgot she had a youngest son, Rickon, who was only 6 years old. Suddenly, Robb excused himself as he saw a fire. However, it was merely a diversion, as someone intended to kill Bran. At that moment, Catelyn tried to fight back, but she had no skills. Fortunately, Bran's friend, who always guarded him, was there. Elsewhere, Daenerys was seen undergoing a body treatment. While doing so, she continued to warm her dragon eggs, hoping that they would hatch someday. Meanwhile, after the attempted murder, Catelyn went to the location where Bran had fallen. There, Catelyn found evidence in the form of a long strand of hair, indicating that Bran had not fallen accidentally but had been pushed because he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Catelyn also suspected that the Lannister family was involved in all this, strengthened by the fact that the knife used for the murder was made of Valyrian steel with a handle made of dragon bone, indicating that it was not an ordinary knife. Therefore, Catelyn planned to go to King's Landing to secretly inform her husband about her suspicions. Before leaving, Catelyn created a charm in the form of a scarecrow to protect Bran from evil creatures. Returning to Daenerys, who ordered her maid to teach her how to satisfy a man like Khal Drogo. On the other hand, Sansa, while walking with her direwolf, was suddenly approached by Prince Joffrey, who invited her to go with him. At that moment, they accidentally encountered Arya practicing stick fighting with a butcher's son. Seeing this, Joffrey invited the butcher's son to spar with him. However, when the butcher's son refused, Joffrey immediately cut his cheek. Because of this, Arya immediately angry and hit Joffrey with a stick while her direwolf also attacked the prince. Knowing that her direwolf would become a target of the palace guards, Arya was forced to drive it away to avoid it being killed. At night, Ned kept searching for Arya in the forest until one of his soldiers informed him that she had been taken before the king by the queen's orders. It turned out, Joffrey complained to his mother that he had been attacked by the butcher's son, Arya, and her direwolf. Naturally, Arya denied it because her story was different. Unfortunately, the queen tried to manipulate Sansa, who knew she liked her son, to talk, but Sansa admitted that she didn't know anything because everything happened too quickly. King Robert tried to be fair, but the queen insisted that Arya's direwolf should be killed. Sadly, since Arya's direwolf was not found, Sansa's direwolf had to be its substitute. Before killing Sansa's direwolf, Ned saw that the butcher's son had already been killed by the royal soldiers. At the same time, Bran finally woke up from his coma. Upon arriving in the capital, Ned was greeted with a cold reception from Jaime, who reminded Ned that his father and brother were burned alive in this place by the Targaryen king. It was as if he was warning Ned not to cause trouble if he didn't want to end up like his father. Hearing this, Ned remained calm because the man before him was a coward hiding behind the royal throne. After that, Ned met with the council members, including Lord Varys as the royal advisor, Renly, who was King Robert's brother, Baelish as the royal treasurer, and the eldest, Grand Maester Pycelle, who had served several previous kings. They gathered to hold a welcoming event for Ned as the king's new hand. However, seeing the total prize to be given, Ned felt it was excessive and a waste, especially since Baelish informed him that the kingdom owed 80,000 gold coins to Tywin Lannister, who was none other than King Robert's father-in-law. Switching to Cersei, who was treating her son's wound caused by the wolf bite, Joffrey took the opportunity to ask if he really had to marry Sansa. His mother answered yes, because Sansa was a young and beautiful woman. But if Joffrey did not like her, He just needed to marry her and sleep with any prostitutes he wanted, just like his father often did. Still holding a grudge, Joffrey promised to raise taxes for the Winterfell region. Then, every year they would have to give him 10,000 men to become royal soldiers, and he would not hesitate to destroy them if they did not follow his orders. However, his mother reminded him that Winterfell was not just any territory. Especially when winter came, not even the 7 gods could save her son's army. She also said that a king must know when to attack and when to retreat, and that was the key to conquering enemies. At dinner, Arya kept playing with her knife because she was still upset with Joffrey for causing her friend's death. Ned tried to calm them down, giving Sansa a doll to replace her dead direwolf, but Sansa did not like the doll. Ned then went to Arya's room and was surprised to find that she had a sword. At that moment, Arya expressed her frustration with Sansa, Joffrey, and Queen Cersei because, to her, they were all liars. Her father tried to reassure her and said that winter was coming soon, so they should protect each other, not be enemies. Arya understood this, as she did not really hate Sansa, but she could not understand why her father would marry Sansa to a coward like Joffrey. Meanwhile, Bran, who had just regained consciousness, asked his nanny to tell him scary stories. The nanny immediately told him about the White Walkers, creatures who moved with their dead horses through the forest in winter, scouring towns and kingdoms for prey. Unfortunately, the story was cut short as Robb arrived to visit his younger brother. Robb then asked what happened, as he often saw Bran climbing, but this was the first time Bran had fallen. Unfortunately, Bran admitted that he did not remember the incident at all, and even wanted to die after learning that his legs were broken. Meanwhile, Catelyn and Roderick finally arrived in King's Landing, disguised as commoners. However, 2 soldiers recognized them and asked Catelyn to follow them to the palace. It turned out that Baelish had ordered the 2 soldiers, as he knew about her arrival in the capital because Lord Varys had many spies. Additionally, Lord Varys was aware of the problem they were facing, although he did not know who the knife belonged to. Baelish admitted that the knife had originally been his until Joffrey's coronation as prince. After that, Baelish had to give the knife to Tyrion Lannister because he lost a bet. On the other hand, Jon Snow demonstrated his fighting skills in front of other soldiers. At the same time, Commander Mormont received a message from a raven for Jon Snow, entrusted to Tyrion. Likewise, Ned received a message that his wife was in a brothel. Naturally, this made Ned angry at Baelish for leaving his wife in such a place. Shortly after, Catelyn called her husband, then entered and asked what had happened. In the armory, Jon Snow was approached by 3 knights who did not accept being defeated by him. Fortunately, Tyrion arrived and threatened to report them to the kingdom if they caused any trouble. As a result, they retreated. Afterward, Tyrion informed Jon Snow that Bran had begun to regain consciousness. Meanwhile, Baelish warned Catelyn and Ned that, although they had the knife as evidence, accusing Tyrion of masterminding the attempted murder of their son would be considered treason, especially if he claimed the knife had been stolen by someone else. On the other hand, Cersei began to panic after hearing that Bran, the only person who knew about their secret, had regained consciousness. But Jaime, her twin brother, reassured Catelyn that he would do anything, including killing the king, if anyone dared to disturb them. Back to Ned, who told his wife to return home for her safety and promised to report to King Robert once he had solid evidence. At the same time, King Robert was seen reminiscing about his glory days when he was formidable on the battlefield, even feared by his enemies. At that moment, Lancel Lannister, who was a cousin of the Lannister siblings, was serving him. Since King Robert liked to reminisce about the past, he called Jaime and asked him to recount how he killed Aerys Targaryen, the king before King Robert ascended the throne. Switching to Daenerys, who was still traveling toward Dothraki, she suddenly ordered her troops to stop for a rest. However, this offended Viserys, because he believed he should be the one giving orders, not her. Meanwhile, Jon Snow was experiencing his first time climbing to the top of the wall. At that moment, he met his uncle Benjen and saw the dense forest covered with thick snow. Benjen then mentioned that he would go into the forest that morning after receiving an unbelievable report. Hearing this, Jon Snow insisted on joining his uncle, but Benjen refused because he was not a ranger. Before leaving, Benjen told Tyrion not to pretend to know about the northern forest since he had never explored it. Tyrion replied that he did not underestimate the Night's Watch, but he did not believe in stories about giants and astral creatures like White Walkers in the northern forest. returning to Daenerys's maid that noticed swelling on Daenerys's body and was sure that she was pregnant. The maid then informed Ser Jorah about the pregnancy. Consequently, Ser Jorah decided to go to Qohor first. Elsewhere, Commander Mormont and an old blind man named Aemon are seen chatting. Through their conversation, it is revealed that summer has lasted for 9 years, and Aemon adds that, according to Stark in Winterfell, winter is coming soon. This is supported by the many people fleeing south, claiming to have seen White Walkers. Aemon admits he is worried about this winter because the number of members in the Night's Watch is now less than 1,000. On the other hand, Tyrion bid farewell to Jon Snow because he was returning to King's Landing. Tyrion stated that if he had the time, he would definitely visit Winterfell to check on Bran. At the same time, Ned deliberately summons a swordsman named Syrio to train his child after discovering that his child enjoys learning swordsmanship. In Winterfell, Bran dreamt of being able to walk and kept following a raven. When he woke up, Theon invited him out of his room because someone wanted to see him. It turned out that the person was Tyrion, who asked Bran if he liked riding horses, and he answered yes. Because of this, Tyrion designed a special saddle for disabled people. At that moment, Robb was suspicious of why Tyrion was suddenly being kind to his younger brother. Tyrion then explained that he had a conscience for certain people such as an illegitimate son, the disabled, and the broken. If Robb wanted to repay his kindness, he just needed to allow Tyrion to enjoy the brothels in Winterfell. The scene shifted to Jon Snow training with other soldiers. Their commander, Alliser, brought someone named Samuel who wished to join the Night's Watch. However, when Samuel was tested, Jon Snow, feeling pity, immediately stopped the beating and helped him up. This action displeased Alliser, who then ordered 3 of his men to attack Jon Snow. Sometime later, Khal Drogo's group had arrived at the place of the Horse Lords. At that moment, Daenerys asked Ser Jorah if her husband gave an army to her older brother, could they reclaim the 7 kingdoms? Ser Jorah then replied that it was uncertain because the Dothraki army had never crossed the Narrow Sea. Moreover, their horses had never drunk the water of the Narrow Sea. So, even though the Dothraki army was large, they would struggle to conquer the 7 kingdoms because of the vast sea that separated them. Additionally, their leader did not care much about power and only knew that King Robert was a foolish king who always waged open warfare. Ser Jorah also admitted to having made a mistake by selling slaves, which led Ned to banish him from his homeland. On the other hand, Sansa's maid was seen took her around the palace, showing her the throne that she and her future husband Joffrey would sit on. However, Sansa, who deeply loved the arrogant prince, feared that one day she might not be able to give her husband a son. Switching to the adjacent room, Ned reiterated that he did not agree with holding this extravagant tournament, but since it was the king's order, he could not do anything about it. Lord Varys then mentioned that by holding such a tournament, many people would visit the capital, increasing their revenue and simultaneously diverting the image that the royal treasury was still abundant. After the meeting, Ned asked Maester Pycelle for an explanation about Jon Arryn's death. Hearing this, Maester Pycelle replied that Jon Arryn's illness killed him quickly. However, the day before he died, Jon Arryn gave him a book about lineage and history. Ned then asked again if Jon Arryn had any last words before he died, where Maester Pycelle answered that there were none. Ned was still skeptical about Jon Arryn's natural death, suspecting that something caused his death, possibly poison. Upon arriving home, Ned was informed by Arya that Bran had regained consciousness. Arya then asked if Bran would join them in the capital, but Ned answered no, as Bran needed to regain his strength first. Meanwhile, Samuel approached Jon Snow and said that he was ordered by Commander Alliser to be his watch partner. At that moment, Jon Snow asked why Samuel wanted to become a Night's Watch soldier, despite having no fighting skills and poor vision. Samuel explained that his father had disowned him because he didn't want a useless son and would have abandoned him in the woods if Samuel didn't become a soldier. Knowing that Ned was investigating Jon Arryn's death, Baelish provided a tip about 2 people who were close to him before he died. The first was Ser Hugh, Jon Arryn's squire, and the second was a weaponsmith. Ser Hugh was a knight who refused to speak with Ned's trusted person, insisting on speaking directly with the hand of the king. Not long after, Ned visited the forge that Jon Arryn frequented before his death. At that moment, the owner said that Jon Arryn came not for weapons, but to see an apprentice named Gendry. It turned out, Jon Arryn was so close to Gendry that he dared to ask about his mother. Jon Arryn then replied that she had blonde hair, and used to sing to Gendry when he was little. However, Ned was surprised because, after examining Gendry's face, he saw a strong resemblance to King Robert. After hearing Samuel's heartbreaking story, Jon Snow asked his comrades to go easy during the next day's training. He even threatened them with his direwolf if they didn't comply. The following day during training, they all fell quickly. Alliser, knowing this was Jon Snow's doing, immediately warned him. Switching to Viserys, who was torturing Daenerys' maid for daring to summon him to his sister's place. But this time, Daenerys stood up to him, reminding her arrogant brother that she was now the queen of the Dothraki and could kill him anytime if he dared to hurt her. Sometime later, the tournament began. The first match pitted Ser Gregor, the brother of the king's executioner, against Ser Hugh, the former squire of the late Jon Arryn. After failing in the first attempt, Ser Gregor managed to kill Ser Hugh in the second attempt. Meanwhile, Ned was approached by Queen Cersei, asking about his purpose for coming to the capital. Ned answered that he was merely fulfilling the king's orders and would always protect the kingdom if needed. Meanwhile, Catelyn, disguised as a commoner, was resting at her birthplace. By coincidence, Tyrion also entered the place and immediately recognized Catelyn sitting beside him. This, of course, surprised the people there as they did not expect their queen to be around. Taking advantage of the situation, Catelyn urged everyone there to capture Tyrion, whom she suspected as the mastermind behind her son's attempted murder. Ned, having just learned that Ser Hugh had died, immediately entered the knight's tent with Ser Barristan to see Ser Hugh's body. Ned was suspicious about why Ser Hugh suddenly died just when Ned wanted to interrogate him, as if the tournament was already orchestrated. After that, Ned met with King Robert, who intended to wear his armor for the tournament. Unfortunately, his armor no longer fit because his belly had grown too large. Back to the tournament, a knight named Ser Loras challenged Ser Gregor. Apparently, Loras knew that Gregor's horse was suffering from a cold, so he took advantage of this to win the match. Disappointed with his horse, Gregor took a sword and beheaded it. Not only that, Gregor also attacked Loras, forcing the royal guard, who was Gregor's younger brother, to intervene. The sibling fight was halted after the king ordered them to stop. Meanwhile, Catelyn headed to the Vale, bringing Tyrion as her prisoner. At that moment, Tyrion reminded her that her accusation was irrelevant because it was unlikely that a murderer would leave his weapon at the crime scene. While arguing, they were suddenly attacked by a group of local tribesmen. Tyrion then asked Catelyn to untie him so they could escape on horseback, but in the end, Tyrion chose to save her. On the other hand, Bran was learning the history of the kingdoms in the Seven Kingdoms, taught by Luwin, the council member, and watched over by Theon, who was practicing archery. Meanwhile, Lord Varys, who had many spies, suddenly approached Ned to inform him that the king was now in danger. Lord Varys also warned Ned to be careful because, besides Queen Cersei, many council members were monitoring his movements. While chasing a cat, Arya unknowingly entered a basement and overheard two palace guards discussing a plan to kill her father. In another room, Lord Varys and Baelish, two men with many spies, were revealing each other's secrets. Lord Varys mentioned that Baelish was once infatuated with Catelyn, Ned's wife. Meanwhile, Baelish exposed Lord Varys by calling him a homosexual. After entering the palace and changing clothes, Arya told her father about what she had overheard earlier. Their conversation was interrupted when Yoren suddenly came to report that Catelyn had captured Tyrion, which made Ned worry that this issue could endanger him in the palace. Meanwhile, Catelyn was intercepted by the forces of the Vale and taken directly to the castle. Not long after, Ned was summoned by King Robert to discuss Daenerys' pregnancy with the council members. It turned out, King Robert wanted them to launch an attack against Daenerys, including killing the unborn child, because he feared that she would give birth to a son who would inherit Targaryen blood and one day seize his throne with the help of the Dothraki army. However, Ned tried to oppose this order as, in principle, he would not kill women and children. Ned also did not trust the news as it came from Ser Jorah, a man who had previously betrayed them. Unfortunately, the council members fully supported King Robert's decision. As a result, due to this difference in opinion, Ned chose to resign and remove his badge as the Hand of the King. On the other hand, Lisa, Catelyn's younger sister and the widow of the late Jon Arryn, the ruler of the Vale, was furious because she brought a member of the Lannister family, whom she believed had killed her son's father. In her rage, Lysa immediately imprisoned Tyrion in a cell facing the edge of a cliff. Meanwhile, the dark side of Renly, King Robert's younger brother, began to be revealed, as Renly was in a romantic relationship with the Knight of Flowers, Ser Loras. At the same time, Queen Cersei approached King Robert and mentioned Ned's resignation as the hand of the king. Cersei knew that her husband must be reluctant to let Ned go, much like he was reluctant to let go of his love for the late Lyanna, Ned's sister. When this was brought up, King Robert bluntly admitted that no woman could ever replace Lyanna in his heart. The scene shifted to Ned visiting a woman in a brothel. The woman claimed that her daughter was the result of her relationship with King Robert, which puzzled Ned. After leaving the place, Ned was confronted by Jaime and his men, who asked about Tyrion's whereabouts. Since Ned refused to answer, Jaime's men killed Ned's guards, leading to a fight. The fight was evenly matched, but Ned was stabbed from behind by one of Jaime's soldiers. When Ned woke up from unconsciousness, he found himself back in King's Landing in front of King Robert and Queen Cersei. At that moment, Cersei wanted Ned to tell his wife to release Tyrion immediately. Likewise, Ned wanted Jaime to be brought to justice for the attack. As Cersei continued to speak provocatively, King Robert felt helpless. In the end, he slapped Cersei. King Robert admitted that he never cared for his Lannister siblings because he preferred to consider Ned as his brother. Therefore, King Robert wanted Ned to resume his position as the hand of the king before he would be forced to give it to Jaime. King Robert then bid farewell to Ned, saying he was going hunting to relieve his stress. Meanwhile, Daenerys was seen placing her dragon eggs on a fire, but she did not feel any, unlike her maid, who was immediately burned by the heat. The scene shifted to Winterfell, showing Bran that could finally ride a horse again thanks to the saddle designed by Tyrion. While waiting for Bran to ride, Robb and his friend Theon discussed Ned being stabbed in the leg by Jaime's guard, and how Jaime himself walked into Robb's castle without anyone touching him. Apparently, Theon wanted Robb to take action because it was an insult to Winterfell. However, Robb was possibly not ready and told Theon to be quiet because dealing with this was not his responsibility, while Theon was not his family. Suddenly, Robb realized that Bran was nowhere to be seen and asked Theon where he had gone. It turned out that Bran was lost in the forest and encountered some wildlings who were migrating south because they feared the White Walkers. Fortunately, Theon's arrow hit its mark, and Robb spared a woman who promised to serve him. Meanwhile, Tyrion nearly fell after dozing off and dreaming of being chased. Tyrion then pleaded with Moat to release him, promising to make him rich. However, finding no gold coins on Tyrion, Moat did not believe him. Switching to Daenerys, she was performing a Dothraki ritual of eating a horse's heart so that her child would become brave and strong. At the same time, Viserys felt jealous because his sister was more respected than he was. Furthermore, Khal Drogo had not given him an army yet, even though Viserys needed it to reclaim the throne from King Robert. As a result, Viserys secretly tried to steal Daenerys' dragon eggs with the intent to sell them in exchange for an army. Fortunately, Viserys was caught by Ser Jorah because dragon eggs could not be traded. Back to Tyrion, who tries to persuade Moat to deliver a message to Lady Arryn that he will confess all his crimes. Because of this, everyone eagerly wanted to hear Tyrion's wicked confession. However, Tyrion only admitted to the mistakes he made as a child and did not confess to Jon Arryn's murder or the attempted murder of Bran. This angered Lysa, who thought Tyrion was making a joke, and she threatened to throw him out the moon door. But Tyrion was quick-witted. He declared his innocence and demanded a trial by combat. Lysa then granted his request, followed by knights who were confident they could defeat Tyrion easily. Because of this, Tyrion wanted his brother Jaime to fight for him. Of course, Lysa refused because Jaime was not there, and justice had to be served immediately. Fortunately, a man named Bran volunteered to fight for him. Meanwhile, King Robert, accompanied by several members of his council, enters the forest to hunt wildlife. During the journey, King Robert talks again about women, urging his younger brother Renly to stop being gay and to try being with a woman from the Riverlands. In King's Landing, Ned was visited by a commoner seeking justice because his home and family had been slaughtered. The commoner didn't know who the perpetrator was, but he mentioned that the attacker left a sack of dead fish. Hearing this, Baelish suspected that the attacker was from House Tully, the region where Catelyn was from. However, when the commoner described the attacker as a tall man who could decapitate a horse in one stroke, They became convinced that the attacker was Ser Gregor, a knight from Casterly Rock, a vassal of Tywin Lannister, the father of the Lannister siblings. Therefore, Ned ordered a knight named Beric Dondarrion to find Gregor because he intended to execute Ser Gregor. Additionally, Ned wanted Tywin Lannister summoned to the palace to answer for his vassal's actions, and if he did not come to the palace within 2 weeks, he would be declared an enemy of the kingdom. Switching back to Bran, who represents Tyrion in a fight against one of the Knights of the Realm. After an intense battle, Bran emerges victorious, allowing Tyrion to be freed without injury. At the same time, Sansa is seen braiding her hair like the women from the south to express her love for Prince Joffrey. Her caretaker, who notices this, warns Sansa not to forget her status and origins. However, Sansa ignores her. Soon after, Prince Joffrey arrived and gave Sansa a necklace, promising to marry her soon. Unfortunately, her father ordered them to return to Winterfell for their own safety. Naturally, Arya refused because she still wanted to train with Syrio, and Sansa couldn't accept it either, as it would mean giving up her chance to become queen. Afterward, Ned casually opened a book on the history of the kingdom and discovered a surprising fact when reading the lineage of King Robert, where all of Robert's ancestors and siblings had black hair, whereas Joffrey had blonde hair. Meanwhile, during a small feast hosted by Khal Drogo, Viserys suddenly appeared drunk, demanding the crown he had promised him. If Khal Drogo didn't give it to him now, Viserys threatened to kill the baby in his sister's womb. Feeling disrespected, Khal Drogo signals his men to capture Viserys and orders them to melt gold in a pot. Once the gold is liquid, Khal Drogo immediately commands his men to pour the molten gold over Viserys' head, killing him instantly. After causing trouble in the capital, Jaime returned to see his father at Casterly Rock, where his father criticized Jaime's actions as reckless and unnecessary. Regarding Tyrion, Tywin wanted Jaime to free him and promised to give Jaime 30,000 troops for backup. Jaime was quite surprised by this, realizing that Tyrion was valuable to his father. Tywin then stated that although Tyrion was a dwarf, he was still a part of the Lannister family. In the capital, Ned summoned Queen Cersei to inform her that he had discovered everything, from Jon Arryn's death to her affair with Jaime, her twin brother, which led to Bran being pushed out of fear that their secret would be exposed to Robert. Ned then promised to report all of this to Robert, including the fact that Joffrey was not his biological son but Jaime's. Cersei then tried to explain that all of this was part of a bloodline purification, similar to what the Targaryens had done for over 300 years. Additionally, Cersei expressed her deep disappointment that Robert loved Lyanna, Ned's sister, more than her. However, Ned did not want to hear any excuses because the truth had to be revealed. Therefore, Ned offered Cersei a chance to leave the palace to avoid bloodshed. But Cersei was undeterred by Ned's threat and countered by warning that his life would not last much longer. Meanwhile, Theon approached the woman who had nearly harmed Bran the previous day. Theon then boasted that he was actually of royal blood, being the son of Balon Greyjoy. Theon then flirted with the woman because he was bored and wanted to kiss her. Unfortunately, Luwin arrived in time and forbade him, considering the woman to be a guest. Luwin then asked why Theon was there, where he replied that he did not intend to stay but wanted to head south because he feared winter was coming and the White Walkers would soon awaken from their slumber. At the wall, Jon Snow and Samuel were patrolling on top of the fortress, until a riderless horse arrived, and Jon Snow recognized it as belonging to his uncle Benjen. Back in King's Landing, Renly informed Ned that King Robert had been attacked by a wild boar during his hunt. Because of this, Ned rushed to the king's chamber, where Joffrey, Cersei, and others were already present. At that moment, Robert admitted that he had drunk too much alcohol and did not realize the boar had charged him. Feeling weak, Robert asked Ned to arrange a grand funeral for him and said everyone should taste the boar that had attacked him. This caused Ned to reconsider his intention to reveal everything about Cersei. Robert then asked Ned to write his will on official royal parchment, where he stated that, as the person who had died from a boar attack, he appointed Ned as the regent and protector of the realm until Joffrey came of age. Moreover, Robert wanted Ned to teach his son to be a good king, unlike himself, who drank alcohol and did bad things every day. On the other hand, Daenerys persuaded Khal Drogo to reclaim the throne from King Robert so they could sit on the throne as king and queen. However, Khal Drogo, who was not power-hungry, asked his wife not to discuss the matter again. For him, The rightful throne was the saddle of a horse. While strolling through the market, Daenerys spoke to Ser. Although her brother Viserys was foolish, she believed he was the rightful heir to the Seven Kingdoms before King Robert forcibly took the throne. Unfortunately, Ser doubted this, as he believed that if Viserys wanted to be the king of the Seven Kingdoms, he would have to reclaim it. Ser then secretly met with a small child, who handed him a letter purportedly from the spider, urging him to return home because the king had pardoned him. At the same time, Daenerys was tempted to try a drink offered by a vendor who claimed it was the favorite beverage of the gods. Feeling honored by the queen's presence, the vendor was willing to gift her a whole barrel of his best drink. Seeing this, Ser sensed something was amiss and asked the vendor to drink it first. Unfortunately, the vendor suddenly fled, but he was caught in time. Meanwhile, Commander Mormont gave some advice to the new members of the Night's Watch. Their duty was not to serve the king but the realm, and anyone who deserted or abandoned their post would be sentenced to death. Commander Mormont then announced who would become rangers and who would become stewards. Surprisingly, Jon Snow was assigned as a steward despite his considerable fighting skills. This made Alliser, the senior ranger who disliked Jon Snow, smile. It turned out, Jon Snow was tasked with serving Commander Mormont, including washing his clothes, changing his bed linens, and other chores. Initially, Jon Snow was very disappointed because he had come to the Wall to become a ranger. However, after hearing Samuel say that this was actually a good opportunity for Jon Snow, he became silent. Samuel explained that by being with the commander every day, Jon Snow would learn how to lead, and perhaps Commander Mormont was grooming Jon Snow for leadership in the future. Back in King's Landing, Renly, King Robert's younger brother, suggested that Ned gather troops to overthrow Joffrey as the prince and expel the Lannisters from the kingdom before they could devise a plan. Renly also wanted Ned to make him king in place of Robert, even though the rightful successor to Robert was Stannis, Renly's older brother and also King Robert's brother. But Ned did not want to discuss this yet, as he did not want Robert's funeral to be marred by bloodshed. Secretly, Ned sent a letter to Stannis Baratheon because there was something they needed to discuss. Ned also summoned Baelish to discuss the succession, as he wanted to make Stannis the next king because he was the rightful heir, not Joffrey, who was the illegitimate son of Cersei and Jaime. However, Baelish seemed to disagree and suggested that Ned should make peace with the Lannisters and marry his daughter to Joffrey, thus maintaining his power within the palace. Ned immediately refused, remembering their crimes, including the attempt on his son's life. Ned preferred to die rather than ally with the Lannisters. At the same time, Jon Snow and Samuel took their vows to become soldiers of the Night's Watch before a heart tree. The scene shifts to Khal Drogo, who is furious because his wife nearly became the victim of an assassination attempt by an agent from the Seven Kingdoms. As a result, Khal Drogo vows to cross the Narrow Sea, conquer the Seven Kingdoms, and crown his son as king, just like his grandfather, the Targaryen king. Sometime later, Ned finally receives news that King Robert is truly dead, and now Joffrey and Queen Cersei want him to attend the first council meeting led by King Joffrey. At that moment, Baelish informs Ned that the City Watch will side with him. Unfortunately, Renly had already left the kingdom at dawn, taking 50 soldiers and his lover with him. Shortly after, Ned immediately enters the hall and orders Ser Barristan to read Robert's will, which states that the king would transfer power to Ned until Joffrey comes of age. However, Cersei promptly tears up the will and orders Ser Barristan to arrest him. Ned, who also brought soldiers, was undaunted by the threat, but unfortunately, the city guards betrayed him, orchestrated by Baelish. A rebellion also erupts where Ned and his children are staying. As Arya, who is training with her sword, is forced by the royal guards to come with them to see her father. Syrio, not trusting the guards because they are Lannister soldiers, tells Arya to flee while he holds them off. Meanwhile, Sansa is taken by the prince's guards, whereas Arya is forced to kill a boy sent by Queen Cersei to capture her. Not long after, in the cell, Ned is visited by Lord Varys, who brings him water and informs him that Arya has escaped the castle, while Sansa remains betrothed to Joffrey, and all of his other men are dead. At that moment, Lord Varys apologizes, explaining that he couldn't do anything to help because he is unprotected, lacks soldiers, and has no power like the Lannisters. According to Lord Varys, what angered Cersei the most was Ned knowing the truth about Joffrey's parentage. Before leaving, Ned asks Lord Varys whose side he is truly on. Switching to the Wall, Two of the soldiers, named Arthur and Jafer, were found dead in the forest, but Uncle Benjen remains missing. However, Samuel finds it odd that the corpses of these two men do not smell, even though they have been dead for a long time, prompting them to plan to burn the bodies. Shortly afterward, after reading a letter from King's Landing, Commander Mormont informs Jon Snow that King Robert has died and his father is branded a traitor to the kingdom for not recognizing Prince Joffrey as king. Commander Mormont then warns Jon Snow not to do anything foolish because his duty is here. Furthermore, Commander Mormont is confident that the kingdom will take good care of Jon's siblings. On the other side, Sansa faced the threat of her marriage to Joffrey falling through due to her father's predicament. However, Cersei promised to make everything all right if Sansa would send a message to her mother and eldest brother, urging them to come to King's Landing and swear loyalty to King Joffrey. Not long after, the letter reached Robb, and he decided to go to King's Landing, with an army sworn to his father. Theon strongly supported Robb's decision, recalling how his own father once attempted a rebellion but failed. Likewise, Catelyn asked her younger sister to help by providing troops because her son was about to declare war on the Lannisters. Otherwise, her husband would rot in prison. Unfortunately, Lady Arryn refused her sister's request, fearing it could endanger the life of her son, Robin. Meanwhile, Tyrion and Bran were ambushed by the hill tribes of the Stone Crows. Fearing for his life, Tyrion offered them wealth if they would let him and Bran pass through the mountains. He even promised them the Vale if they joined him. At the Wall, Jon Snow nearly killed Alliser because he insulted his father, calling him a traitor. Fortunately, his comrades intervened. Jon Snow was also scolded by Commander Mormont, who ordered him to go to his quarters. That night, Jon Snow's direwolf became restless, arousing his suspicion. Jon Snow then went to Commander Mormont's quarters and suddenly, the corpse of Arthur turned into a zombie and attacked him. The zombie came back to life before Jon Snow threw fire at it, saving Commander Mormont. Meanwhile, Khal Drogo's forces were seen slaughtered a village to obtain valuables to hire ships to travel to the Seven Kingdoms. Seeing this, Daenerys was displeased with some of Khal Drogo's men for torturing the women and reported it to her husband. One of the men, feeling insulted, challenged Khal Drogo by stabbing him in the chest with a sickle. Feeling indebted to Daenerys, a woman named Mirri Maz Duur offered to heal Khal Drogo's chest wound. She claimed that she often treated people with ringworm and sometimes acted as a healer when she needed money. Meanwhile, Robb gathered the elders of Winterfell and urged them to go to the capital to save his father. An old man named Greatjon Umber then asked Robb to place his troops at the front lines, as he considered Robb still a boy. Offended by the insult to his master, Robb's direwolf lunged at the old man, biting off 2 fingers. Instead of being angry, the old man laughed, followed by Robb and the others. Robb then bid farewell to Bran, telling him that he would leave for the capital tonight to save their father, and that Bran must stay behind to take care of their youngest brother. Additionally, the youngest sibling of Bran is named Rickon, who feels frustrated because his parents are never around. Shortly after, while Bran was praying, the hill woman who is now Robb's slave suddenly approached him and said that the gods they worship are not in the south. Therefore, the war should be fought in the north so that they can be assisted by the gods. On the other hand, Samuel explained that Arthur's corpse had been touched by White Walkers, which is why it turned into a zombie with blue eyes. Their decision to burn the corpses was the right way to stop it. Samuel knew this because he had read an old book and hoped that the wall was high enough to protect the realm from such creatures. Coincidentally, Catelyn found her son's camp with approximately 18,000 troops. Catelyn then hoped her son could conquer the many Lannister soldiers, because if her son were to lose, her husband and her daughter in the capital would be killed, just like what had been done to the Targaryens. Meanwhile, Tyrion arrived at his father's preparation camp, introducing the people he brought with him, including Bran, who had saved his life in the Vale. Tyrion then asked his father to equip the hill tribes with weapons because they had spared his life. Hearing this, Tywin mentioned that Jaime had successfully conquered the Reaper's territory and was now heading to the Riverlands to conquer Catelyn's homeland, while they themselves would prepare to face Robb's troops advancing south. At the same time, Robb was discussing with his commanders whether to attack the south directly or to stop Jaime first, who was about to attack the Riverlands, with the intention of getting the Reaper King to join their cause. The problem was that to carry out either plan, they had to meet with Lord Frey first, the lord who controlled the Key Bridge. Shortly after, Robb's forces captured a spy from Tywin who was scouting the Northern Army. Robb then asked the spy to estimate their numbers, and the spy replied that they had 20,000 or more troops. Knowing this, Robb then instructed the spy to deliver a message to Tywin that the Northern Army would soon come to bleed gold from their bodies. In the capital, King Joffrey and Queen Cersei were busy with a cabinet reshuffle, including the dismissal of Ser Barristan, who had long served the kingdom. Naturally, Barristan was disappointed and left the hall with a look of dismay. After the meeting ended, Sansa immediately knelt down and begged for her father's pardon from Joffrey and Queen Cersei. Hearing this, Joffrey agreed on the condition that her father admitted his wrongdoings, including acknowledging him as the rightful heir to the throne. On the other hand, Lord Varys visits Ned in his cell again, informing him that his daughter, Sansa, has knelt and begged for his pardon. Additionally, Lord Varys tells him about Robb's plan to gather an army and advises Ned to acknowledge Joffrey as king to create peace in the realm. Even if Ned does not value his own life, he must do it for the sake of his children. Sometime later, Robb's army was hindered by a long river in the Riverlands, and to cross it, they had to negotiate with Lord Walder, who had controlled the bridge for 600 years. Because of this, Catelyn decided to negotiate with Lord Walder, who liked young women and had many children. During their meeting, Walder claimed to know what had happened to Catelyn's family but did not want to help her because it would create enmity between him and the Lannister clan. However, Catelyn reminded Walder of his promise to her father that he would always help the Tully family or Catelyn's family, but it certainly would not be for free. Switching to the Wall, because Jon Snow had saved him from that zombie creature, Commander Mormont gifted him a royal sword with a direwolf's head made of Valyrian steel. The sword was initially meant to be inherited by his son, Ser Jorah, who was now Daenerys' trusted companion. But since Ser Jorah had disgraced him, the sword was not given to him. Jon Snow then showed the sword to his friends, and they were very pleased, except for Samuel, who had read the news that Jon Snow's brother Robb was now heading south. Back to Catelyn, who brings good news that they are allowed to cross the bridge on the condition that one of Walder's sons, Oliver, will join Robb and be given the title of knight. Meanwhile, Arya will marry one of Walder's sons when they come of age. After the war, Robb will also marry one of Walder's daughters of his own choosing. Unfortunately, Robb cannot refuse if he wants to cross the bridge. Meanwhile, Aemon intentionally called Jon Snow because he knew how Jon Snow felt when his father and family were in a difficult position. It turned out, Aemon had felt the same when he heard that his brothers had been killed, and he could do nothing because he had sworn allegiance to the Night's Watch. It turned out that Aemon was from Targaryen and was Daenerys' uncle. On the other hand, the unexpected situation happened to Khal Drogo, after he suddenly fell from his horse due to the wound on his chest. Seeing this, Khal Drogo's commander wanted them to continue the journey without Khal Drogo. However, Daenerys disagreed because she did not want to leave without her husband. The discussion about Robb being just a boy continued to be a topic of conversation for Tywin. According to Tywin, relying only on bravery would lead to Robb's defeat on the battlefield. Tyrion then appeared quite disappointed with his father because he and his companions from the Stonecrows tribe would be on the front lines when the battle began. Back to Ser Jorah, who advises Daenerys to leave immediately because after Khal Drogo's death, there will be a duel to determine the new Khal or Dothraki king. Daenerys refuses, believing that the child she is carrying should be the new Khal. Hearing this, Ser Jorah explains that the Dothraki do not follow such traditions, as the strongest will become the leader. Moreover, the child she is carrying will be killed and given to the dogs. At the same time, the female healer who visited Khal Drogo the previous day returned and said that he could not be saved unless black magic was used. The healer then asked Daenerys to sacrifice her horse to the spirits. During the ritual, no one was to enter the tent, and Daenerys agreed. Khal Drogo's commander, who was ambitious to become the next Khal, intended to disrupt the ritual. He then struck his fellow soldiers and even pushed Daenerys, causing her pregnancy to be disturbed. Because of this, Ser Jorah was forced to bring Daenerys into the tent, fearing for the safety of her baby. On the other hand, Tyrion confessed to Bran that he once married someone, but his father immediately expelled his wife upon learning that his daughter-in-law was a prostitute. The next day, Tyrion gathered his coalition, the Hill tribes, to prepare because the enemy was close. Ironically, as the troops moved forward, Tyrion fainted after his small body was knocked over by the soldiers. When he woke up, the battle was over, and the Lannisters had won. However, Their spies had miscalculated the enemy's numbers, thinking there were 20,000 troops when there were only 2,000. This meant Robb's plan had successfully deceived Tywin, as most of his forces were focused on fighting Jaime, who was ultimately captured. On the other hand, Arya, who had escaped from the castle, was now a vagrant and struggled to find food. Suddenly, she saw a crowd heading to an open field, and one of them mentioned the hand of the king. In the open field, Ned was forced to confess that he had planned treason against the kingdom and to acknowledge that Joffrey was the rightful heir to the throne, all for the safety of Sansa and his family. Unfortunately, despite complying with Cersei and Joffrey's demands, Joffrey still sentenced Ned to death. At that moment, Arya and Sansa could not accept it, but they were powerless to stop it. Because of this, Yoren, a man from the north, shaved Arya's hair so that she would not be recognized as Ned's daughter. Meanwhile, Bran, along with the hill woman who had pledged her service to him, went to the family crypt because Bran had dreamt of seeing his father there. Unexpectedly, a direwolf appeared before him, and it turned out to be his sister's direwolf, there for the same reason to see their father. Outside, Luwin sadly informed Bran that his father was dead. The same news reached Catelyn, who was so devastated that she did not respond to the soldiers saluting her. Robb also felt the sorrow and vented his anger by chopping down a tree. After beheading Ned, Joffrey invited one of the city's famous singers. However, due to a wrong lyric or some other reason, Joffrey ordered the palace guards to cut out the singer's tongue. Not only that, Joffrey took Sansa to see the heads of the traitors to the kingdom, including her father's head. At that moment, Joffrey promised to behead her older brother as well, and that Sansa would have to watch it someday. During this time, Sansa considered pushing Joffrey off, but the prince's guard quickly stopped her. Sometime later, after Ned's death, the elders of Winterfell began discussing who truly deserved to be king in King's Landing. Renly or Stannis were both legitimate heirs to the throne, but Amber preferred if Winterfell became a sovereign region, separating from the Seven Kingdoms, and agreed to make Robb the next king. This declaration was supported by the other elders, who swore loyalty to King Robb of the North. Meanwhile, Catelyn visited Jaime, who was their prisoner. At that moment, Catelyn intended to kill Jaime with a stone and then behead him, especially since he confessed to pushing Bran from the tower. However, Catelyn did not know the real reason behind why Jaime pushed her son, so she decided not to kill him yet. On the other hand, Tyrion's uncle blamed Tywin for not making peace with Robb's forces, especially after King Robert's brothers, Renly and Stannis, also declared war. But Tywin was not ready to consider that yet because his main concern was finding a way to save Jaime, his son. Tywin eventually acknowledged Tyrion's intelligence, admitting that he had previously advised against making an enemy of Ned and suggested using him to form alliances with other kingdoms to gradually undermine the Baratheon family. Because of his intelligence, Tywin appointed Tyrion as the hand of the king in King's Landing to oversee the king, his siblings, and the council members who might pose a threat of betrayal. Elsewhere, Daenerys is devastated when she wakes up to find out that her child could not be saved. At that moment, the witch explained that the child was no bigger than a lizard, had wings, and when touched, its skin fell away from its bones. Daenerys understood that this was the price she had to pay to save her husband. However, upon seeing Khal Drogo in a vegetative state, Daenerys protested to the witch. The witch then responded that Khal Drogo's life was as good as hers. Though Daenerys saved her from Khal Drogo's men, the witch felt she had lost everything, as her temple was burned and her virginity taken by Khal Drogo's men. Similarly, Khal Drogo would live, but it was pointless as he had lost everything. Meanwhile, Jon Snow, upon hearing the news of his father's death, decided to leave despite Samuel trying to stop him. Because of this, Samuel and two other friends pursued Jon Snow, who finally halted when he ran into a tree branch. The three friends convinced Jon Snow to return, reminding him of his oath to the Night's Watch. On the other hand, Daenerys, not able to bear seeing her husband like this forever, decided to end his suffering by killing him. The scene shifted to Arya, who was being taken north by Yoren along with others destined to become slaves. Although she was harassed by some boys, Arya was saved by Gendry, who was King Robert's illegitimate son. At the Wall, Commander Mormont was furious about the increasing reports of wildlings and supernatural creatures beyond the Wall. Therefore, he decided to lead the troops himself into the forest to find these creatures and to discover whether Benjen was alive or dead. Meanwhile, Daenerys held a funeral ceremony, placing 3 dragon eggs on her husband's pyre. She also decided to burn the witch's punishment for failing to revive her husband. As the fire consumed everything, Daenerys walked into the flames without feeling the heat. When the fire finally died down, Daenerys emerged alive, with 3 hatched dragon eggs. This sight made Ser Jorah and the others immediately kneel before her. The first season of Game of Thrones ended. Moral lesson from the story: when life gets you down, just remember, riding a horse with a special saddle might save your day. But don't forget to be cautious of wild boars in the forest, or you might get stabbed by their tusks.